Hi, this is Jim Laval with Infinite Allergy Labs. I'm a board certified clinical nutritionist and clinical pharmacist, and today we are going to talk about food allergens and weight gain and how food sensitivities and allergens can play a role in disrupting your metabolism. So it's interesting when you hear the word metabolism, you think, oh, I've either got a fast or a slow metabolism. But really, when you look deeper into it, your metabolism is the sum total of all of the chemical reactions that drive how you feel today, and more importantly, where your future health is leading you. So, how your metabolism is functioning is more than just how you're burning fat. It's the amount of efficiency that's taking place in your chemistry. And it's under the direct influence of global metabolic inflammatory signaling, meaning that there's a term called metaflammation. Metabolic inflammation drives metabolic dysregulation. And when metabolic dysregulation occurs, one of the biggest problems associated with that is weight gain. And we see this in the clinical literature where it talks about metaflammation and how that's intertwined and related to the development of diabetes, obesity, heart disease. And so it's important to take hold of your metabolism. Literally, understanding the disruptors of your current metabolic performance can lead to strategies for you to cut off excessive inflammatory signals and rejuvenate your health on a cellular level. One of the biggest things that I do in our practice is we test people for food allergies and intolerances and get them off of foods that their immune system has become sensitive to. What's the reason for that? Well, it's obvious. We want to reduce the amount of inflammation signaling that's taking place in the body. Now, here's a perfect circuit board. It's simple, but it really explains the importance of this. One of the things that can happen is that we can get under stress. And as we get under stress, we can trigger our brain or our hypothalamus to tell the pituitary gland, to tell the adrenal glands to make more cortisol. And making more cortisol leads to changes in gut permeability. Now, let's track the other way. The hypothalamus can send a signal to the spinal cord to increase fight or flight response, secreting more adrenaline and noradrenaline through the enteric nervous system via the enterochromaffin cells and nerve fibers, and that triggers more peripheral corticotropin releasing hormone. That causes more permeability to the intestinal lining. Remember, the intestinal lining is just one cell layer thick. We're going to get to that in just a minute. The third way that you get permeability changes is that increase in peripheral corticotropin releasing hormone turns on your mast cells, and your mast cells start to release histamine and other inflammatory cytokines that make your gut more permeable, or you may hear the term leaky gut. That's going to make more antigens be presented to your immune system because they get through that leaky gut and trigger more inflammation and immune activation. And when that happens, that's when your metabolism starts to get disrupted and more or less it gets off the rails. So you can take a look at these pictures. If you look at A, it's kind of a 50,000 foot view of the intestinal lining. And then you look at B, where it gets a lot more close in, and you can see the actual epithelial cell and the brush border cells that are at the top of that epithelial cell. And remember, one cell layer thick. And those little purple squiggly lines are the tight junctions. And those tight junctions act as the patrol. They're the guard gate to let things in and be absorbed or not. And so as you can see in this particular picture, this was for people with irritable bowel, is that unfriendly bugs can get through the intestine and then trigger a more immunologic response, leading to the pictures on the right. If you look at the big picture, C, where you see all the cracks and crevices through the intestinal lining, or D, where you see the big gaps and those brush border cells allowing for particles to get through. What you're really looking for in terms of food allergies and intolerance is to not allow proteins or peptides or offending food chemicals to get through that tight brush border system and tight junctions to be allowed to get into the general circulation so that your immune system reacts. But also, you could have immune reactions inside the intestine. And this is really important to keep in mind, that the beneficial flora of your gut help to dictate a lot of this. The title of this was microbiota dysbiosis. So, not having the correct flora or microbiome driving dysfunction in inflammatory bowel disease and colorectal cancer. And this is exploring a common ground hypothesis. It's not just in these very heroic situations like irritable bowel and colorectal cancers. This can be going on, triggering things like food allergies and autoimmunity as well. And in this particular picture, we see that displayed. So if you look on the left-hand side, you've got these healthy intestinal mucosal cells. The tight junctions are intact and in the right place. You've got nutrients that are trying to be actively transported through those mucosal cells so that they can enter the bloodstream. That's down at the bottom here. And then, of course, you have immune cells in the bloodstream as well. Now, as we move across to the right, what we see is that you begin to get a leaky gut. And with a leaky gut, we start to see undigested food particles reacting with the immune system, creating a food sensitivity or an antibody response, as well as unfriendly bugs now moving through that barrier that's now compromised and getting into the bloodstream. So you begin to get antibodies into the bloodstream that are now ready to be active against the food that they got exposed to in the gut. And now it starts to create a generalized food reactivity that causes inflammation, food sensitivities, as well as food allergies. So the more you keep the gut intact, the less there's an inflammatory response. The more there's an inflammatory response, the more food sensitivities are present. The efficiency of your metabolism goes down. You reduce the absorption of nutrients, so you become nutrient deficient. So now I can't have the nutrients that I need to run my metabolism, like chromium and selenium and iodine and carnitine, right? The things that help us with thyroid hormones and burning of fat, blood sugar regulation, all of those things get disrupted. And now through the process of inflammation and the process of elevated stress response, we end up with an exaggerated fat storing ability and an inability to counteract against that. And here's what you're trying to correct. This is the balance of your immune system, right? You've got the Th1 side, which is what fends off invaders, right? You make T killer cells and natural killer cells. And the other side, Th2 helper cells, that's where your antigen antibody response is at. And so this is where you begin to create immune tolerance, and you can start to have an overreactivity of inflammatory signaling. So an overproduction of Th2 factors leads to autoimmune, allergic, and sensitive conditions. And remember, when you're under stress and the gut permeability changes and your mast cells are releasing histamine and inflammatory cytokines, you're pushing your body towards this Th2 side, which drives this inflammatory signaling and can lead to problems like weight gain. And look, a lot of people are on drug therapies, right? So there's drugs that commonly affect the microbiome. And so antibiotics, non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs, corticosteroids, oral contraceptives, proton pump inhibitors, metformin, statins, antipsychotic and antidepressant drugs, opioids, and there's a host of other drugs that have not been tested yet that potentially could affect the microbiome. I'm bringing this up because a lot of times people will say, well, gosh, once I started this drug, I seem to gain weight. Part of that mechanism could be explained, and that the microbiome could be altered, and you're triggering low-grade inflammatory signaling and creating gut permeability changes that is now making you more intolerant to certain foods. And this is right out of the study showing the gut microbiota, intestinal permeability, and obesity-induced inflammation. And so in this case, the microflora disruption can lead to leaky gut, low-grade endotoxemia, which means you're circulating extra inflammatory compounds around, non-alcoholic fatty liver, you get systemic inflammatory signaling and weight management issues. And so this is a big deal when the microflora gets disrupted and we start to see these changes in inflammation signaling. And this, of course, relates to just simply the effects of the microbiome on host hormones. So you can literally change neurochemicals, serotonin, dopamine, norepinephrine. Look, when your serotonin and dopamine goes down in terms of weight management, you're going to crave foods. And you'll also crave foods when you're having an allergic response to them. And so there can be this really vicious cycle of having an allergic response, getting this immunologic drive going, and then as your serotonin production gets altered, you begin to crave foods and have more impulsive and compulsive eating behaviors. You can also see changes in your sex hormones when the gut microbiome is off, as well as the signaling of compounds like leptin and ghrelin, which are signaled by your microbiome and actually can tell you and manage whether or not you're hungry or not. So these gut imbalances really do lead to obesity. And you have to keep in mind that obesity is absolutely characterized by low-grade inflammation. And that gut microbiome imbalance is linked to all kinds of inflammatory conditions like obesity, type 2 diabetes. Probiotics, of course, can be of benefit. There's commonly imbalances in the microflora that have been reported in these individuals. And of course, gut health is important for metabolic homeostasis, but one of the first things you need to do is you've got to get rid of the offending foods. And you get rid of the offending foods, the best way is you can do an elimination diet, take out some of the big allergens and start to add them back in and see how you feel. Do you hold water? Do you feel gassy? Do you feel bloated? Do you feel tired? The best way is to do a test, get a blood test and test across not just IgG immune reactivity, but to look across multiple categories of food reactivity and learn about what's really triggering your immune system. And this was an interesting study. This was a Turkish study with overweight men and women. They put them on allergy elimination diets and they lost weight without muscle. The title of this was The Determination and the Effects of an Elimination Diet Applied for Overweight and Obese People with Food Intolerance on Body Composition and Biochemical Parameters. So here's the bottom line. 82 people, and they randomized them to either be on an elimination diet, meaning they got tested for food allergens, or a calorie-restricted diet for weight loss. Both diets were basically set at 58% carbohydrate, 13% protein, and 28% fat. I think that alone would limit your weight loss success, but that's another story. The elimination group lost 8.6 kilos in 6 months. You know, that's pretty close to 20 pounds, 5 kilos of body fat. So literally at least 12 pounds of body fat and a significant reduction in triglycerides, a slight reduction in blood glucose, cholesterol, and LDL. Just the caloric restriction diet only lost 1 kilogram in 6 months. They didn't lose any body fat. They increased their blood glucose. They had a slight reduction in their cholesterol and their triglycerides. So this showed unequivocally that when you got rid of foods that was tested to be sensitive to, that there was an improvement in loss of fat mass and total weight loss. And that was just the data. I won't go through that. That was the data that was behind it. And this isn't, you got to remember, food allergens and hypothyroidism. Food sensitivities can cause things like chronic constipation. It's a known side effect of hypothyroidism. Gluten intolerance is thought to be a known cause of increased thyroid hormone antibodies. You can read about it as soon as someone gets diagnosed with autoimmune Hashimoto's thyroiditis. They should be taken off of gluten, and they should be tested for celiac sprue on a yearly basis. And I actually test them for food allergens right away so that I get all the inflammatory compounds being reduced that are being triggered by food, so I can take the pressure off of the immune system as it attacks the thyroid. So it's not clear whether gluten-free diet can prevent an autoimmune disease, but autoimmune thyroid patients with or without celiac disease benefit from a diet low in gluten. It's been shown. It slows its progression, leads to reduced potential for other disease and complications. So what's this mean to you? Basically, the more I can control my thyroid, the better off my metabolism will be, the better I'll be able to maintain my weight. And while eliminating gluten, should reduce chronic inflammation and improve outcomes in autoimmune thyroiditis, they also were found to reduce beneficial flora. Why? Well, maybe they didn't get in enough starch or enough fiber intake. So I just wanted to bring this up, that if you are doing some kind of avoidance diet, why not test for the foods that you're exactly sensitive to, and make sure that regardless you're getting enough starch or at least enough fiber, prebiotics, and even think about taking probiotics as well to be supportive. Accuracy of test is key for results. This, of course, is the hallmark sign of Infinite Labs. This is what we strive to attain, is accurate results that can help clinicians, help their patients. And for you, and if you're out there interested in weight management, just don't go for the cheapest food allergy test. All food allergy tests aren't created equal. The Infinite Allergy Lab test is really the most exact and tests for the most allergen categories of any test that's out there with the most accuracy. So when you look at this, IgE, IgG4, well, what's that mean? Well, as your body starts to get sensitive to things, it can have different classes of reactions. The IgG4 reaction is actually there to try to buffer the IgE response. If you can look at this, it can show that you can go in low range, moderate range, or in high range. If you look next, there's the IgG response and the C3b, C3d result. This is showing how much immune reaction is actually occurring as a deepened response to that IgG result. So if you have reactions in that IgG4 and that C3bD category, that's something you want to pay particular attention to. Now, the beauty of this test is, as it will give you a list of foods for both a moderate food elimination plan, or if you're having severe symptoms, a more restricted elimination plan. So it can fit either needs. You may choose to do the lighter one first, or if you're working with a healthcare provider, they may see, I want you to do the most restrictive plan. So it's just important to note, one, not all allergy tests are created equal. Secondly, the Infinite Allergy Lab panel is the most accurate on the market. And third, that if you follow getting rid of these food allergens, most likely you're going to see an improvement in managing your weight, getting weight off, but even more importantly than that, getting a good handle on that metabolic inflammation known as metaflammation that is sometimes silent but driving your chemistry in a direction towards chronic health problems and conditions versus having chronic health and vitality. So I hope you enjoyed this presentation. This is Jim Laval for Infinite Allergy Labs. Have a great day.